the only real thing. Rain fell steadily over the city as Pond sat alone in an unmarked car across the street from one of the most powerful crime organizations in the country. The mission had already lasted 6 months, and every day felt longer than the last. To everyone around him, he was no longer Officer Pond Naravit from the Special Investigation Unit. He was now Narin, a man with a questionable past who worked for whoever paid the highest price. It was a dangerous role, but it had earned him something valuable: access. His target was the Vachirakul family, a criminal empire that controlled illegal businesses across the city. The police had spent years trying to gather enough evidence to bring them down, yet every operation had failed. This time was different. This time, they had someone on the inside. Pond adjusted the earpiece hidden beneath his dark hair and listened as his partner's voice crackled softly through the connection. Any movement? Not yet, Pond replied quietly. Stay alert. Intelligence says the boss's son will leave soon. Pond's eyes remained fixed on the building entrance. The boss's son. The future heir of the organization. Phuwin Vachirakul. The investigation files described him as intelligent, well-educated, and extremely protective of his family. Unlike his father, there was no direct evidence connecting him to any criminal activities, but that didn't make him harmless. In fact, it made him even harder to read. A few moments later, the building doors opened. Several bodyguards stepped outside first, scanning the area carefully. Then a young man appeared between them. Pond immediately recognized him from the photographs. Phuwin looked different in person. Younger somehow. Less intimidating. He wore a simple black shirt and carried a book under one arm, looking more like a university student than the heir to a criminal empire. He laughed at something one of the bodyguards said, and for a brief moment, he seemed completely normal. Pond frowned. Something didn't match the image he had built in his mind. Target spotted, he reported. Visual confirmation. Through the rain-covered windshield, he watched Phuwin climb into a black car before disappearing into traffic. Another day. Another observation. Another step closer to completing the mission. At least that was what Pond told himself. 3 weeks later, everything changed. Pond had successfully earned the trust of several members of the organization and was slowly moving closer to the inner circle. That evening, he was invited to a private gathering hosted by one of the family's business partners. It was the perfect opportunity to gather information. The event took place inside an expensive hotel overlooking the city skyline. Music filled the ballroom while wealthy guests laughed and drank beneath crystal chandeliers. Pond blended into the crowd easily. Years of undercover work had taught him how to become invisible when necessary. He was scanning the room for potential targets when someone suddenly spoke beside him. You look bored. Pond turned toward the voice. His heart nearly stopped. Phuwin stood only a few feet away. Up close, he looked even younger than expected. His dark eyes carried a quiet confidence, and there was a small smile on his lips. Pond forced himself to remain calm. Maybe the party isn't interesting enough. The smile widened slightly. Careful. My father paid for this party. Then I should probably pretend to enjoy myself. To his surprise, Phuwin laughed. The sound was genuine and warm. Not at all what Pond had expected. I've never seen you before, Phuwin said. That's because I usually avoid parties like this. Smart decision. For the next few minutes, they talked casually. Nothing important. Nothing dangerous. Yet the conversation felt unexpectedly easy. Pond found himself relaxing despite knowing exactly who stood in front of him. This was supposed to be a target. A source of information. A means to an end. Instead, Phuwin spoke about books, travel, and university life. He seemed more interested in discussing literature than family business. What are you reading these days? Phuwin asked. Pond blinked. That was not a question he had prepared for. A crime novel. Any good? Depends how it ends. Fair answer. Once again, Phuwin smiled. Pond hated how much he noticed it. Before either could continue, one of the bodyguards approached. Mr. Phuwin, your father is looking for you. The young man sighed dramatically. Duty calls. He turned back toward Pond. It was nice meeting you. You too. For a moment, neither moved. Then Phuwin extended his hand. Pond hesitated only briefly before shaking it. See you around, Narin. The use of his undercover name felt strangely personal. Maybe. Phuwin walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Pond remained where he was, watching him go. His earpiece crackled suddenly. Report. Pond blinked and looked away. I've made contact with the target. Good. Gain his trust. Pond's gaze returned to the place where Phuwin had disappeared moments earlier. For the first time since beginning the mission, a feeling of unease settled in his chest. It was a dangerous feeling. The kind that undercover officers were warned about from the very beginning. Because the moment a target stopped feeling like a target, everything became complicated. And Pond had a feeling things were about to become very complicated indeed. After their first meeting at the hotel, Pond expected things to return to normal. He would continue gathering information, sending reports to his team, and slowly working his way deeper into the organization. That was the plan. Unfortunately, plans rarely survived reality. 3 days later, his phone rang just after midnight. It was his handler. We have a new objective. Pond leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. What is it? We need access to the Vachirakul family's private records. That's not exactly easy. We know. A brief silence followed before the part Pond had already anticipated arrived. Get closer to Phuwin. Pond stared at the city lights outside his apartment window. How close? Close enough that he trusts you. The line went quiet. Trust. Such a simple word. Such a dangerous thing. I understand, Pond finally replied. After the call ended, he remained motionless for several seconds. Then he reached for the investigation file lying on his desk. The photograph of Phuwin stared back at him. For the first time, looking at it made him uncomfortable. A week later, another opportunity arrived when one of the family's business partners organized a charity event for local schools. It was exactly the kind of public appearance Phuwin often attended. Pond arrived early. The ballroom was filled with teachers, sponsors, journalists, and wealthy guests. Everything appeared normal, but experience had taught him that appearances could be deceptive. He was standing near a refreshment table when he heard a familiar voice. Narin. Pond turned around and found Phuwin smiling at him. Somehow, seeing him again felt easier than it should have. I didn't expect to see you here, Phuwin said. You keep saying that. Because you keep appearing unexpectedly. Maybe you're following me. Phuwin laughed. I was about to accuse you of the same thing. The conversation flowed naturally after that, almost too naturally. They walked through the event together, discussing everything except business. Books. Movies. Travel destinations. Embarrassing childhood stories. For someone raised inside one of the most feared families in the country, Phuwin seemed remarkably normal. The more Pond learned about him, the more confused he became. The investigation files described an heir to a criminal empire, but the person standing beside him seemed more interested in discussing his favorite novels than inheriting power. At one point, a group of reporters approached. Instantly, the atmosphere changed. Phuwin's smile disappeared and his posture became rigid, professional, and careful. The reporters asked questions about his family, the company, and future plans. Every answer was polite. Every answer was perfect. Every answer revealed absolutely nothing. Only after the reporters left did Phuwin relax again. Tiring? Pond asked. You have no idea. You handled it well. I've had years of practice. Something in his voice sounded sad. Pond noticed it immediately. What would you rather be doing? The question seemed to surprise him. For several seconds, Phuwin remained silent before smiling faintly. Reading in a cafe somewhere nobody knows my name. Pond blinked. That wasn't the answer he expected. That's your dream? It's a simple one. There are worse dreams. Phuwin looked at him. You understand that better than most people. The comment lingered between them. For a brief moment, Pond felt as though Phuwin could somehow see through him. Not the undercover identity. Not the lies. Just the loneliness hidden beneath them. Over the next month, they met more often. Sometimes by coincidence. Sometimes because Phuwin invited him. Coffee shops. Bookstores. Quiet restaurants away from cameras and bodyguards. Little by little, the distance between them disappeared. Pond kept reminding himself why he was there. Every conversation had a purpose. Every meeting was part of the mission. At least that was what he told himself. The truth became harder to ignore. He genuinely enjoyed spending time with Phuwin, and that was a problem. A very serious problem. One evening, they sat together inside a small cafe while rain tapped softly against the windows. Phuwin was reading while Pond scrolled through messages on his phone. The scene felt strangely peaceful. Almost normal. Almost real. What are you thinking about? Phuwin suddenly asked. Pond looked up. You ask difficult questions. Occupational hazard. You're not a detective. No. Phuwin smiled. But I think you're hiding something. For a split second, Pond's heart stopped. Had he discovered something? Did he know? But then Phuwin laughed. Relax. I meant emotionally. Relief washed through him. You should stop doing that. Doing what? Making people nervous. I'm very good at it. Clearly. Phuwin smiled again before his expression softened. You know, I'm glad we met. The words caught Pond off guard. Why? Phuwin looked down at his coffee. Most people only see my family name. His voice was quieter now. They see money, power, influence, and they never see me. Pond didn't know what to say because the truth was that he had done exactly the same thing. When he first saw Phuwin, all he saw was a target. Nothing more. Nothing less. Now things felt different. Dangerously different. I see you, Pond said quietly. Phuwin looked up. Their eyes met, and neither looked away. For a moment, the sounds of the cafe seemed distant. The rain outside grew heavier, and something unspoken passed between them, something neither was ready to name. That night, after returning home, Pond sat alone in his apartment. His laptop displayed the latest investigation report. A blank page waited for him. He should have written everything. Every detail. Every weakness. Every opportunity. Instead, he stared at the screen for nearly an hour. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Phuwin appeared. Thanks for today. A few seconds later, another followed. I had fun. Pond looked at the words, then at the empty report, then back at the words. For the first time since accepting the mission, he found himself asking a question he never should have asked. What happens when the person you're supposed to betray becomes the person you trust the most? Deep down, he was beginning to fear the answer. The deeper Pond became involved with the Vachirakul family, the more dangerous the mission grew. Every week brought new information, new risks, and new reasons to end the operation before someone got hurt. Yet every time he considered stepping back, he thought about Phuwin. Somehow, the man who was supposed to be his target had become the person he looked forward to seeing most. It was a mistake, and Pond knew it. Unfortunately, knowing something is wrong does not always make it easier to stop. One evening, Pond was reviewing surveillance reports at a safe house when an encrypted message arrived from one of the undercover agents working inside the organization. The information immediately caught his attention. A meeting had taken place between several senior members of the Vachirakul family business. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. But one detail stood out. Phuwin's name appeared multiple times. Pond continued reading, and a cold feeling settled in his stomach. The conversation wasn't about protecting Phuwin. It was about removing him. According to the report, several powerful figures inside the organization believed Phuwin would be a weak successor. They viewed his kindness as a liability and his lack of interest in the family business as a threat. If he inherited control one day, their influence would disappear. Someone had already begun making plans. Pond stared at the screen for several seconds. Damn it. His phone immediately rang. It was his handler. You've seen the report? Yes. Then stay focused. Pond frowned. Someone wants him dead. He's not the mission. The response came instantly. The organization is the mission. They're planning something. Then document it. Pond clenched his jaw. That's all? Your job is gathering evidence, not protecting targets. The line went silent. Pond lowered the phone slowly. For the first time since joining the police force, he found himself genuinely angry with an order. Because Phuwin was no longer just a target. He was a person. A good person. And someone was planning to kill him. 2 days later, Pond met Phuwin at a small bookstore cafe they both liked. The younger man arrived carrying 3 novels and a coffee in each hand. I bought yours too, Phuwin said as he sat down. You're becoming predictable. That's rude. It's true. Phuwin laughed and slid one of the drinks across the table. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Almost enough to make Pond forget what he had learned. Almost. Throughout the conversation, he found himself studying Phuwin more carefully than usual. The way he smiled. The way he talked about books with genuine excitement. The way he trusted people far more easily than someone raised in his position probably should. The realization made Pond uneasy. Phuwin had no idea how much danger surrounded him. What? Phuwin suddenly asked. Pond blinked. What? You've been staring at me for 5 minutes. I have not. You absolutely have. A grin appeared on Phuwin's face. It's slightly concerning. Pond shook his head. You're imagining things. Terrible liar. The comment hit closer to the truth than Phuwin realized. Later that evening, after they left the cafe, Pond noticed something unusual. A black sedan had been parked across the street since before they arrived. At first, he assumed it was security. But when the vehicle slowly began following them, every instinct he had developed as an undercover officer immediately activated. Pond casually glanced behind them again. Same car. Same distance. Not security. Surveillance. His pulse quickened. The threat was moving faster than expected. Change of plans, Pond said suddenly. What? Come with me. Before Phuwin could respond, Pond grabbed his wrist and guided him into a crowded shopping center nearby. The younger man looked completely confused. Narin, what is happening? Just trust me. They moved through the building quickly, weaving between shoppers and changing directions several times. Pond checked every reflection, every entrance, every exit. Eventually, he confirmed the vehicle was gone. For now. They finally stopped on the upper floor near a quiet hallway. Phuwin crossed his arms. Okay. Explanation. Pond opened his mouth, then closed it again. He couldn't tell the truth. Not yet. I thought someone was following us. Someone? Probably nothing. Phuwin stared at him. You dragged me through an entire shopping center because of probably nothing? When you say it like that, it sounds strange. Because it is strange. Despite the joke, concern slowly replaced the amusement in Phuwin's expression. Are you okay? The question caught Pond off guard. Most people would have asked if they were okay. Phuwin was asking about him. I'm fine. You don't look fine. Their eyes met. Once again, Pond felt the weight of everything he wasn't allowed to say. Every lie. Every secret. Every hidden truth. Narin. Phuwin's voice softened. Whatever is bothering you, you don't have to deal with it alone. The words struck harder than they should have. For a brief moment, Pond wanted to tell him everything. The mission. The investigation. The danger. The truth about who he really was. But he couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, he forced a small smile. I'll remember that. They stood there in silence for several seconds. Then, unexpectedly, Phuwin reached out and adjusted the collar of Pond's jacket. The gesture was simple. Gentle. Intimate. There, he said quietly. Better. Pond froze. Their faces were suddenly much closer than before. Neither moved away. Neither spoke. The world around them seemed to disappear. For one dangerous moment, Pond forgot about the mission entirely. Then his phone vibrated. Reality returned instantly. He stepped back and looked away. We should go. Phuwin nodded, though disappointment briefly flickered across his face. As they left the shopping center together, neither noticed the figure standing on the floor below. A man watched them from the shadows before speaking quietly into a phone. I found him. A pause followed. Then he smiled coldly. And he's closer to Phuwin than we thought. For the first time, the threat was no longer approaching. It had already arrived. After the incident at the shopping center, Pond could no longer convince himself that everything was under control. The threat against Phuwin was real, and worse, it was getting closer. Every report that arrived at the safe house confirmed the same thing. Someone inside the organization had decided that Phuwin was standing in the way of their future plans. The police wanted evidence. The people behind the conspiracy wanted Phuwin gone. And Pond was trapped between the two. For the first time since accepting the mission, he found himself caring more about one person's safety than the success of the operation. It was dangerous. It was unprofessional. It was unavoidable. During the following weeks, he stayed close to Phuwin whenever possible. He told himself it was for protection, but deep down he knew there was more to it than that. Every shared meal, every late-night conversation, every moment spent together only made walking away harder. One evening, they met at Phuwin's apartment. The younger man had invited him over to watch a movie and escape the endless pressure of public appearances. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the city lights glowed outside. It should have been a peaceful night. Instead, Pond spent most of it silently watching the entrance cameras on his phone whenever Phuwin wasn't looking. You're doing it again, Phuwin suddenly said. Pond looked up. Doing what? Acting like you're expecting something terrible to happen. Pond forced a smile. Maybe I'm just paranoid. You're definitely paranoid. Phuwin paused the movie and turned toward him. Talk to me. Pond's chest tightened. There's nothing to talk about. That's a lie. The answer came immediately. Phuwin's voice was calm, but his eyes remained fixed on him. You've been distant for weeks. You keep checking your phone. You keep looking over your shoulder. Every time I ask what's wrong, you change the subject. Silence filled the room. Narin. The sound of the name hurt more than Pond expected. Because it wasn't his name. Not really. Every time Phuwin said it, the guilt became heavier. Who are you? The question froze him completely. For several seconds, neither spoke. The rain outside seemed louder than before. What do you mean? Pond finally asked. Phuwin shook his head. I don't mean your job. His voice softened. I mean you. The word struck deeper than any accusation could have. Because the truth was that even after months together, Phuwin only knew the version of him built from lies. The fake name. The fake history. The fake life. Yet somehow, the feelings between them had become real. And that made everything worse. Before Pond could answer, his phone suddenly vibrated. A message appeared on the screen. One sentence. That's all it took. Immediate threat. Leave now. Every muscle in his body tensed. We have to go. Phuwin frowned. What? Right now. Narin, please. Something in Pond's voice made him stop arguing. Within minutes, they were leaving the apartment building through a rear exit. Rain poured heavily from the sky as they hurried toward the parking garage. Phuwin followed without understanding, his confusion growing with every step. Tell me what's happening. Pond didn't answer. He couldn't. Not until they reached the car. Not until they were safe. They were only a few meters away when a gunshot shattered the night. The sound echoed through the garage. Instantly, Pond grabbed Phuwin and pulled him behind a concrete pillar. Another shot followed. Then another. Stay down. Pond shouted. Phuwin's eyes widened in shock. Everything happened too fast. Footsteps echoed through the garage. Voices shouted in the distance. Pond carefully looked around the pillar and immediately spotted two armed men approaching. His heart sank. They weren't here to scare anyone. They were here to finish the job. Who are they? Phuwin whispered. Pond didn't answer because the truth had finally become impossible to avoid. Another shot struck the pillar above their heads. Concrete fragments scattered across the floor. Pond made a decision. The mission. The evidence. The months of undercover work. None of it mattered anymore. Not compared to Phuwin's life. He turned toward him. There's something I need to tell you. Rain and gunfire filled the air around them. Phuwin stared at him. What? Pond took a breath. My name isn't Narin. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. What? My name is Pond. The younger man's face turned pale. Pond. I'm an undercover police officer. The words finally escaped. The truth he had hidden for months. The truth he had promised never to reveal. I was sent to investigate your family. Shock flooded Phuwin's eyes. Pond could almost see his world breaking apart. No. I'm sorry. Another gunshot rang out. Neither moved. Neither looked away. Was any of it real? Phuwin asked quietly. The question hurt more than anything else that night. Pond answered immediately. You were the only real thing about this mission. The honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. For several seconds, Phuwin simply stared at him. Hurt. Betrayal. Anger. All of it visible in his eyes. Then another bullet struck nearby, forcing reality back into focus. Pond reached for him. We have to move. This time, Phuwin didn't pull away. Not because he had forgiven him. Not because he understood. But because despite everything, he still trusted him enough to survive. Together, they ran through the rain while armed men pursued them through the darkness. Behind them, years of lies were finally collapsing. Ahead of them, neither knew what would happen next. All they knew was that by sunrise, nothing would ever be the same again. The rain continued pouring long after Pond and Phuwin escaped the parking garage. The city lights blurred through the storm as they ran through narrow streets and empty alleys, trying to stay ahead of the men chasing them. Neither spoke. Neither knew where to begin. Too much had happened. Too many truths had been revealed. Every step felt heavier than the last. Eventually, they reached an abandoned warehouse near the harbor, one of the emergency safe houses prepared by the police for undercover operations. The moment they stepped inside, Pond locked the door and checked every entrance before finally allowing himself to breathe. The silence that followed felt unbearable. Phuwin stood near a broken window, staring out at the rain without looking at him. For months, Pond had imagined what this moment would be like if the truth ever came out. He had prepared explanations, excuses, apologies. None of them seemed enough now. Phuwin. The younger man laughed bitterly. It was the first sound he had made in nearly 20 minutes. So that's your real name? Pond swallowed hard. Yes. How long? The question was quiet. How long have you been lying to me? Pond lowered his eyes. Since the beginning. The answer hurt both of them. Phuwin looked away again. For several seconds, only the sound of rain filled the room. Was I ever more than a mission? Pond crossed the room slowly. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Long before I wanted to admit it. Phuwin's jaw tightened. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. The words stayed trapped in Pond's throat. Afraid of losing the mission. Afraid of losing his career. Afraid of losing the only person who had become important to him. But most of all, afraid that the moment Phuwin learned the truth, he would look at him exactly the way he was looking at him now. Like a stranger. Before either could continue, Pond's phone rang. His handler. We've arrested 3 members of the organization, the voice said immediately. The operation has started. Pond glanced toward Phuwin. And the people targeting him? They're moving faster than expected. We believe someone leaked information. Pond's heart sank. Meaning? You're not safe there. The call ended. For a moment, neither moved. Then headlights suddenly appeared outside the warehouse. Too many headlights. Pond looked through the window and felt his blood run cold. Several vehicles were pulling into the harbor. They had been found. We need to leave. Phuwin immediately understood from his expression alone. Within seconds, they were moving again. This time there was nowhere left to run except deeper into the harbor. The men pursuing them were getting closer. Gunfire echoed across the docks. Behind them, years of lies were finally collapsing. Ahead of them, neither knew what would happen next. All they knew was that by sunrise, nothing would ever be the same again. The rain continued pouring long after Pond and Phuwin escaped the parking garage. The city lights blurred through the storm as they ran through narrow streets and empty alleys, trying to stay ahead of the men chasing them. Neither spoke. Neither knew where to begin. Too much had happened. Too many truths had been revealed. Every step felt heavier than the last. Eventually, they reached an abandoned warehouse near the harbor, one of the emergency safe houses prepared by the police for undercover operations. The moment they stepped inside, Pond locked the door and checked every entrance before finally allowing himself to breathe. The silence that followed felt unbearable. Phuwin stood near a broken window, staring out at the rain without looking at him. For months, Pond had imagined what this moment would be like if the truth ever came out. He had prepared explanations, excuses, apologies. None of them seemed enough now. Phuwin. The younger man laughed bitterly. It was the first sound he had made in nearly 20 minutes. So that's your real name? Pond swallowed hard. Yes. How long? The question was quiet. How long have you been lying to me? Pond lowered his eyes. Since the beginning. The answer hurt both of them. Phuwin looked away again. For several seconds, only the sound of rain filled the room. Was I ever more than a mission? Pond crossed the room slowly. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Long before I wanted to admit it. Phuwin's jaw tightened. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. The words stayed trapped in Pawn's throat. Afraid of losing the mission. Afraid of losing his career. Afraid of losing the only person who had become important to him. But most of all, afraid that the moment Phuwin learned the truth, he would look at him exactly the way he was looking at him now. Like a stranger. Before either could continue, Pawn's phone rang. His handler. "We've arrested 3 members of the organization," the voice said immediately. "The operation has started." Pawn glanced toward Phuwin. "And the people targeting him? They're moving faster than expected. We believe someone leaked information." Pawn's heart sank. "Meaning?" "You're not safe there." The call ended. For a moment, neither moved. Then headlights suddenly appeared outside the warehouse. Too many headlights. Pawn looked through the window and felt his blood run cold. Several vehicles were pulling into the harbor. They had been found. "We need to leave." Phuwin immediately understood from his expression alone. Within seconds, they were moving again. This time there was nowhere left to run except deeper into the harbor. The men pursuing them were getting closer. Gunfire echoed across the docks. "That's fair. But I know one thing." He turned toward him. "I don't want to lose you." For a second, Pond couldn't speak. Months of fear, guilt, and regret seemed to disappear all at once. "You won't." Phuwin smiled. A real smile. The kind Pond had almost convinced himself he would never see again. Slowly, he reached for Pond's hand. This time, there were no secrets between them. No fake names. No hidden missions. Just 2 people who had survived the storm together. Pond squeezed his hand gently. The future remained uncertain. There would be difficult conversations. New beginnings. Old wounds that still needed time to heal. But for the first time, they would face all of it honestly. Together. As the sun began setting beyond the river, Phuwin leaned his head against Pond's shoulder. The city moved around them, busy as always, yet neither paid attention. They had spent months fighting lies, danger, and fear. Now, at last, they could simply exist beside each other. And as the last light of day reflected across the water, Pond realized something. The mission had ended. But their story was only beginning. The end. Thank you for listening to the entire story. Before you go, please answer the small question below. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video to support the channel and motivate me to create more stories for you. Your support truly means a lot. See you in the next story.